Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. An unusual afternoon meeting of the Built Heritage Subcommittee for September 10th. Call the members to order. I'd also like to acknowledge that Ottawa is built on the unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation, and I'd like to thank the Algonquin people for their hospitality. J'aimerais souligner que la ville d'Ottawa se trouve sur un territoire non cédé de la nation Algonquin Anishinaabe, et je tiens à remercier le peuple algonquin pour son hospitalité. We have regrets today from Councillors Moffat and Councillor Shirelli. Are there any declarations of interest from the members? Seeing none. Confirmation of minutes. Our last meeting was Thursday, August the 8th. Are the minutes from that meeting confirmed? Confirmed, thank you. Okay, the first item on our agenda today is new construction in the Cathedral Hill Heritage Conservation District at 412 Spark Street. We do have a brief staff presentation, and we also have several delegations who've signed up to speak. I want to remind any members of the public who haven't yet signed up, there's a sign-in sheet at the door on the side of the gallery there, and please sign up so if you're interested in speaking. We're just getting the PowerPoint presentations up and running. And we have Sally Coots from our Heritage staff who'll be making a presentation. Still setting up? I'll note while it's setting up, we do have correspondence on file from 4 individuals and groups on this application. All right.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just very impressed by the new system there. Everybody noticed the new system. We're on one big screen. Hooray. This application is in front of you today as an application for new construction in a heritage conservation district. The subject property is a through lot between Queen and Spark Street in the Cathedral Hill Heritage Conservation District, which was designated in 1989. And the subject property is also located beside Christchurch Anglican Cathedral, which was designated in 1977 under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. The Cathedral Hill Heritage Conservation is the city's smallest, consisting of only 8 buildings. In 2010, Windmill Developments, working with the property owner, the Anglican Diocese of Ottawa, initiated a development plan for the church-owned land. This aerial view shows the development to date. It includes I still can't do that though. It includes the 21-story apartment building with townhouses below and a new church hall. This is all the west end of the property, and also a semi-detached structure that was part of the original district is included at the base of the tower facing south towards Queen Street. The surface parking lot to the east of the cathedral is the site of the proposed development. This shows the context of the site. At the west end of downtown, you'll notice that it is surrounded by a number of higher buildings to the south and the Garden of the Provinces and towards LeBreton Flats to the west. So here we have the proposed site viewed from the north and from the south. Again, it was when the district was created, there was a building on this site. It subsequently burnt down, so it has been a large surface parking lot since that time. And you can see from the view looking north towards the Garden of the Provinces, between the only 3 buildings in the district that are not owned by the diocese, and this is the first of these 3 Queen Anne Revival style buildings on the site. This view shows the parking lot when viewed from the east towards the 21-story condo building that was built after the approvals in 2011, and the cathedral which is as I said, Part 4 building. It was designed by Ottawa architect King Arnaldi and is a very good example of the Gothic Revival style. It is built of local Nepean sandstone, and it has its character-defining element facing Spark Street is the tower and the steeple. This is the third time proposal for a building on this surface parking lot has been before Built Heritage Subcommittee or its predecessor, the Ottawa Built Heritage Advisory Committee. So the first approval was given in 2011. It was for an office building. Both of the previous approvals have been for office buildings. Again, this shows an illustration of the property at the time of approval. These were all approved by Built Heritage Subcommittee, Planning Committee, and City Council, and heritage permits were issued. So this is the first iteration, and within a couple of months, it was superseded by this office building. There are elements of both of these that have continued through the current project, including this version had a curved front facade, so it would open up towards the steeple of the cathedral, and the previous version had a stone base which echoed the stone of the cathedral. So these are again forerunners, but neither of them were built. So again, this property is designated under Part 5, and any application, it says to alter designated heritage building, but what I really meant was to, for new construction in Heritage District, require City Council approval. This is the application that is in front of you today. As I said, the design was informed by previous approvals, and also since we initially saw this design in late 2017, it has evolved considerably based on recommendations by city staff and by Urban Design Review Panel. So both groups raised issues regarding the first design, and the changes that were implemented as a result of our comments were the introduction of stone at the podium to reflect the townhouses at the base of the 21-story building, the reintroduction of a curved front facade, the substitution of glass at the southwest corner of the condo to lighten up the building to provide a greater contrast between the steeple and the proposed new building. But I should also note that another difference between the current proposal and the initially approved applications were it is now roughly 8.5 meters higher than the previously approved buildings. One of the ways we mitigated this increase in height was at the suggestion of the Urban Design Review Panel, that upper penthouse story, which is amenity space, was made to be much lighter to diminish the effect of the increased height. This is just views from various vantage points. You see here quite clearly the curve and the effect that it has in opening up views towards the cathedral. This is the view from the east, showing the proposed buildings, the 21-story condominium building that is complete behind it, and the green space that you see in front is currently a surface parking lot, and it is also zoned quite high for around 20 stories, I think. So there is a lot of density on this block already. One of the important aspects of this project, which was also in the previous two projects, is the creation of what's referred to as Philosopher's Walk, which is a pathway that connects mid-block between Queen and Spark Street, and significantly improves the public realm and the use of the sidewalks in front of both. It widens out and then meets with the sidewalk in front of the cathedral and in front of the proposed seniors building to create a much more satisfactory public realm than currently exists with curb cuts and surface parking lots. To the rear, there were changes also made at the suggestion of UDRP and heritage staff to make the parking, the approach to the parking garage and the area above it more compatible and more on a scale with the existing buildings on the site. This is the site plan just to further illustrates the Philosopher's Walk and the treatment of the public realm and Spark Street. There were questions initially about the lay-by. There were I had concerns, as did others, about kind of eroding the public realm, but we feel that that was mitigated through the improvements, the street planting, et cetera, and the improvements balanced the lay-by, and we are also very cognizant of the need for a lay-by for a seniors residence in terms of easy access and egress for the inhabitants. This is an elevation that shows the relative height of the new building and the steeple of the existing cathedral. And here there have been questions. I should add that there are view plane, as we know, there are protected views in the City of Ottawa, and this respects all protected views. The views, the long views from Beechwood Cemetery, this does not enter that view plane, and it does not affect any of the views of Parliament Hill. So these are sort of befores and afters, roughly, of the site. So on the left you see here the current view from just over the Portage Bridge, and then on the right an artist's impression of the building as it in its proposed location to the east of the cathedral. And here again from a farther view you see, and I think this is very interesting because it does illustrate the density in the immediate area. So on the left is the current conditions, and on the right is with the proposed building put into this particular view. In terms of consultation, the usual process was followed. Heritage Ottawa was notified of the application. Their comments were received yesterday and were, I think, circulated as part of the package. Neighbors within 30 meters of the property were notified. The Centretown Citizens Community Association was notified, and as was the ward councillor. I should also add that this is the subject of a rezoning, which will be in front of the Planning Committee on September the 26th, and the land use planner on that site is here to answer any questions that are more planning related questions. So I thank him for being here. So our recommendations today are to approve the application to construct a new building. We recommend this because the building's design and simple expression creates a background building that complements the cathedral and allows it continue to be a dominant element of the Heritage Conservation District. The Queen Street portion of the project respects the character of the streetscape, and the improvements to the public realm through Philosopher's Walk will not only enhance the immediate setting of the proposed building, but also the Heritage Conservation District as a whole. Thank you.
Thank you, Sally. We're going to come back to staff after our delegations for questions and comments. I do want to invite up delegation. We have 3 people representing the applicant: Carl Bray, Sherry Edwards, and Victoria Lucas from Bray Heritage, CSW Landscape Architects, and Reichman Seniors Housing, respectfully. And they have a short presentation, as I understand it, and then there'll be an opportunity for committee members to ask any questions to the applicant.
Is yours loaded?
It should be loaded.
Oh, then you just ask him, because I have no idea.
be a little bit on there, but anyway, it's simpler to just do it that way. Yeah. That looks suspicious. And how do I advance it?
To advance, you can just use the remote.
Okay.
Just the right arrow to
Just
go
right arrow.
forward.
Great. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you.
So I should get rid of this one.
Okay, welcome.
Thank you very much.
You've got 5 minutes for your presentation.
Thank you and good afternoon. My name is Carl Bray. I'm the Heritage Consultant on this project. Sally has done a very comprehensive job of explaining the overview of the project. I'd like to talk a little bit about the process. I've been lucky enough to be the Heritage Consultant on this site for many years, starting with the windmill project and going through to the present. I think it's important to understand that there has been an evolution of the design of both of those components of the project all the way through. And it's important to realize that as a consulting team, we worked very, very closely with Sally and her colleagues. And I was delighted that Sally and her colleagues came in right at the beginning of the project so that they were able to get an idea of where it might go before opinions had hardened, if you want to put it that way. So there was a flexibility and a looseness to the process right from the beginning. Because quite frankly, in the early days of the first phase, the windmill project, the lumber baron's mansion, Roper House, was proposed to be lifted up and moved. And the semi-detached houses on Queen Street were proposed to be leveled. So that changed quite significantly, thanks to the input from the city, but also from other people who had an interest in the site, and quite frankly, from the consulting team itself. So there again was an aspect that the design went through several iterations. And then the commercial, likewise, as Sally showed, it started looking at one way, and then the more the modeling became more sophisticated, it was apparent that unless you curved the facade, you weren't going to be able to see the cathedral until you were practically on top of it. So that whole notion of modeling the massing became an integral part of the overall scheme. But I want to step back a little further and just say, what's the point of conservation here? It's not just about bricks and mortar. The church, the cathedral, the diocese continues to own these properties. This is part of their ongoing survival, if you want to put it that way. And even more so, it's the basis for not just keeping the cathedral and all its activities going, it's also the basis for some of the outreach activities that the cathedral and the diocese as a whole will do in the greater Ottawa community. Affordable housing, various aid programs, that kind of thing. So unusually, it is part of a much longer legacy. It's not just about individual property development. And then in terms of the use, the change from commercial to a senior's residence, I think, offers many, many benefits. And again, fostering what a church does. So you have a volunteer base, quite frankly, in a retirement home. You have a number of synergies that you wouldn't have necessarily with a commercial operation. It's a heritage conservation district. By being one of the earliest, it is very light on specifics, and that's the discussion that Sally and I and others have had throughout the long process. How do you put in appropriate development in a heritage conservation district that is so vaguely defined? And so that's another reason why it was important to have these discussions from the beginning and throughout the process. And I'm very pleased to see that that's been the case. It is a part of the world that's been identified for higher density development. And as you can see from some of the illustrations, I'll just move through them very quickly. You've already seen them before. But the primary thing to keep in mind, and look at this one particularly, you will be seeing this against a number of other higher buildings. And so one of the ways to make the church stand out is programmatic, and this is much of what I've been talking about previously, but also visually. So the curved facade is part of it, carrying a datum of a stone podium and keeping the top of that podium consistent with the datum line of the lower part of the cathedral and also the townhouses. trying to keep the Queen Street side with the datum of the residential buildings on that side. So those are ways of making it fit in. Also, of course, there's been a great deal of emphasis on the public realm, as Sally pointed out. And here's a case where you want to make this part of the world come alive year-round and throughout the day. And so the types of synergies that I mentioned previously are made as possible, as much as possible, with the streetscape layout, with the making very attractive linkages between the two streets, making as much public space in front of the cathedral, linking it to the front of the retirement home and the residential on the other side. So having a part of Sparks Street that really is an extension of the public realm and to some extent complements what happens on the other side of the retaining wall down at the Garden of the Provinces.
Can you wrap up, Mr. Bray?
My last slide here. We live in Canada, so much of the time the cathedral is going to be seen at night. And the way the building has been designed and the way that the public sphere works with it will help the cathedral stand out. And as you can see in this illustration, the cathedral is proud in the proposed design. So in summary, I believe it was a very good process and in my opinion, a model process to get to where we are today. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Bray. So Mr. Bray is representing Bray Heritage, and he is here with Sherry Edwards from CSW Landscape Architects, and Victoria Lucas is with Reichman Seniors Housing. Do any of our committee members have questions for the applicants? All right, no questions. Thanks very much for your presentation today. We have two public delegations remaining. We have David Jeans. David.
Thank you, Chair. I'm speaking as an individual, as I did back in 2011 when this matter was before the previous committee. I first of all wanted to say that I am very satisfied with what has happened so far with the Cathedral Hill redevelopment. The preservation of heritage facades along Queen Street was sensitively handled. The preservation of Roper House on Bronson Avenue and the opening up of green space, maintaining and opening up of green space, both sides of it, and the medium-scale podium for the townhouses on Spark Street. So all of those things have worked very well. I'm also very cognizant of the issues for adaptive reuse of church properties. I've been involved in many of those discussions within the Anglican Church, of which I am a member. But and also I do have a great deal of respect for Barry Hoban as architect, and also for the Reichmans as the operators of such seniors' residences. My father spent his last 5 years very happily in a Reichman residence, and I'm familiar with other properties that they have operated in Toronto and St. Catharines. But I just wanted to point out three things looking back at the previous design, which I think are worth looking at and thinking about. Some of them are also matters for zoning, which will be heard separately at Planning Committee. But when this building was originally proposed, as you know, it was lower height, 12 instead of 18 stories. Now, although the residential stories have been reduced somewhat, I make the height difference still 12.3 meters higher than before. Now, that's more than Ms. Coots said, but nevertheless, there is an increase in height, which in close proximity to the cathedral spire does have an impact. Another impact, though, is that the previous design was designed with a uniform and very calm background. The west wall of the office tower was intended to provide a rather plain backdrop with no horizontal lines and only some vertical slit windows, against which the spire would be viewed as a fairly prominent feature. The new proposal seems to have a much more highly articulated west wall, even though there is a portion that it still incorporates stone. It's also punctured by a large number of windows, and there are a lot of horizontal lines to that wall. So I think perhaps some more thought could be given to that wall as it affects the important views of the spire from Wellington Street and the Portage Bridge as you approach from the west. Certainly the continuation of the curvature of the building to provide a reasonable view as you approach along Spark Street from the east is good. The last point isn't really a heritage issue, but one of the original advantages of an office building was that it was going to have 100 parking spaces, of which 25 were to be dedicated for cathedral use, and the other 75 were going to be available to the cathedral on a time-shared basis, which meant that outside standard office hours, evenings and weekends, those spaces would be available for cathedral functions. Remember, the cathedral is a city-wide institution. It draws its membership from right across the city, and also is a venue for national events as the National Military Cathedral, and also other public events such as concerts and so on. So I have a concern about parking, which is more of a concern for the rezoning of this site, because as it's a residential building for seniors, first of all, the absolute number of parking spaces has been reduced from what was proposed for the office building, and secondly, those spaces will not be vacant evenings and weekends. So I have those concerns, but generally I've been very pleased with what's been done so far, and I have hopes that this building will also provide a good development of the site. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions for Mr. Jeans? All right, thanks, David. And our final delegation on this item is Gianni De Francesco.
Thanks for taking the time to consider my comments. I'll make them quite brief. I think we've already heard about parking as an issue. And I'm going to leave you with some pictures of what a typical Sunday looks like in this neighborhood. Parking is more than an issue. You're going to lose 30 to 50 spots that are currently existing right now. You've got events that are not just Sunday masses. You've got other events like Writers' Festivals. The issue of parking impacts the ability for service vehicles to get down that street and get into the buildings. So right now, and you'll see it in the pictures, if we have the problem of parking that we do now in the future, a fire truck will not be able to get into our laneway at the condo to be able to get in and do what they need to do. I would guess that would be the same for the retirement residence, which I would think is a more critical issue. So that's the issue that I wanted to bring up. When we bought in 2016, just as an aside, as how this impacts me personally, when we bought in 2016, we were aware of the plan to go to a certain height. And we actually consciously bought the higher level because we wanted an unobstructed view of Parliament Hill. That's important to me. And we paid a premium for that. Every floor you go up, you're paying more money. So this has now cost me $30,000, give or take, to have a view that's about to be obstructed. There's nothing you can do about that. It sucks to be me, I get that. But I think there are people in the building who have got some legitimate concerns about what's going to be put up there, the changes that have been made, and more importantly, the safety of the residents, not just in our building, but the building next door. So I'll leave these with you. Thanks very much for your time. And by the way, Mr. Chair, thank you for your acknowledgement of the traditional land here.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. De Francesco?
Sorry.
Okay. Thank you very much. Okay, we do have opportunity for questions for staff. I know, Councillor Brockton, do you want to start? And then Councillor McKenney? Okay.
I was just following up, Mr. Chair, on the speaker's point about some of the site plan issues when this goes to site plan with respect to unobstructed access for emergency vehicles. We don't usually talk about site plan here, but can staff or even the local councillor just acknowledge that, one, the concerns are legitimate, the concerns are real, and that there will be a plan to ensure that all buildings in the vicinity will be unobstructed. So I'm not sure who I'm addressing that to.
Mr. Chair, it's Andrew McCrate, planner with Development Review Central. I'm the lead on the zoning and site plan application, so I'll field that question. Through circulation, I don't recall specifically hearing from emergency services like fire about the access routes, but what to keep in mind is that these are existing streets that function today and are built in accordance with city standards. And if there's issues, I think that the residents are speaking about, you're probably looking at a situation where cars are parked illegally, which in that case, you know, emergency vehicles would have to deal with that on a case-by-case basis as that arises. So from a pure design point of view, access is not an issue. When they go for a building permit, that is also part of the review of that application process where you have to meet the Ontario Building Code, which has a significant component about fire access, the ability to connect to a hydrant and that sort of thing. So it's going to be reviewed at multiple facets through site plan and permit.
Councillor McKinney?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for asking that question. That was mine as well. I just want to go back to the height from 2011 to today and the difference in meters. And what does that mean in terms of the delegate, the resident who just showed up said that, you know, obviously they're, you know, when we move in, when we purchase anything, we know what a certain block of land is, or parcel is zoned for, and we can, you know, plan for that. If you're living on the 11th floor and something is only allowed to go up 9, you can assume that you'll continue to have that 2-floor site. But so what does this mean? Do we know, or like in terms of Cathedral Hill and other residences in the area, how far up have we gone, and what is the level of obstruction?
Mr. Chair, I will attempt this, and if I get it wrong, Andrew will tell me the actual number of meters. So when the zoning was approved for the office building, it was approved at a height of 55 meters, and the current height is 63.5. So the difference is 8 meters, which is about well, in floor to ceiling, like, we don't like talking in stories because it depends on what the use is, but it is 8 meters, which would be 2-ish stories, 3-ish stories. Yeah, so that's the difference.
And the 55 meters was approved in 2011, is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
The curved version that I showed you, that the zoning for that was approved at 55 meters. Whether that building was exactly 55 meters, I can't say.
No, I'm just looking at what the approval was.
The approval was 50.
What was the allowable height limit at that time? Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Member Podolsky, do you have questions? No? Member Halsall?
Yes, so we saw a new rendering this afternoon at night with lighting demonstrating compatibility between the two buildings, and I was just curious, given the sight lines, the fact that this is playing a unique role in the capital realm and the streetscape, the view from the river, is there a lighting plan or any kind of thematic that's being submitted as part of this development that would help tie the two together?
As there was, Mr. Chair, there was I didn't receive a lighting plan, official lighting plan as part of the heritage application. It's not something we normally ask for, but the submission did include nighttime views, one of which you saw today.
Any other questions for staff? Okay. Barry? Member Podolsky, pardon me.
Thank you. Not a question, Mr. Chair, but just a comment. I have to thank the staff for making the presentation, and I also have followed the Cathedral Hill development initiative for over a generation, and I think that having the conservation district approved and having these incremental interventions, I think, are all part of a very wise strategic plan by the city and with the Anglican Diocese to conserve the cathedral, to conserve Roper House, to conserve some of the facades of the houses along Queen Street. And I think that this component of it is one that I think is very creditable, and I'd just like to draw attention to the success that is manifesting itself in this location, this part of the city overlooking the Breton Flats. And the LRT station, when it opens, and I think the Philosopher's Walk is able to conduct some people from Centertown to the LRT station, it will be quite successful and worth philosophizing about. Anyway, I'm going to support the motion. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to thank Mr. Podolsky, plus also I have given 2 papers on actually the development of Cathedral Hill and the incredibly cooperative way of dealing with the site that started, as Mr. Bray stated, with when Windmill was developing the West End and has continued through the development of this property. So I often hold it up as an example of the best in heritage development. So thank you.
Member Quinn, you're good? Anyone else with a question or comment? Okay. I go back to what Mr. Bray began his presentation with, many iterations and a collaborative approach here, and I think they've achieved a good balance between the heritage, between the needs of the diocese, and as well the changing demands of the market. So I think the end result is something that's sensitive to the context and will be a positive for this part of Centertown. Are the report recommendations carried? Carried. Thank you. So this item rises to Planning Committee on September 26th. The second item on the agenda is the Phase 3 Clemo Estate Preliminary Heritage Study. We do have a presentation from planner Leslie Collins, and no speakers registered yet. If there is anyone here who wants to make a presentation, please sign up at the desk. We have one piece of correspondence on this file submitted by David Fleming on behalf of Heritage Ottawa.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll apologize for my cough at the get-go. I'm recovering from a cold. As you mentioned, this is Phase 3 of the Clemo Estate Clemo Estate Heritage Conservation District study. Just a bit of background for you today. It's part of a 3-phase study of potential HCDs in the glebe, directed by Council in 2004. Phase 1 was completed in 2012 and resulted in the designation of the Clemo Estate East Heritage Conservation District, which is east of Bank Street surrounding Central Park. Phase 2 is currently underway with expected completion at the end of 2019, and it includes Clemo Avenue between Bank and Bronson, as well as Monkland and Linden Terrace. The direction for this phase was to study Central Park west of Bank Street and the buildings adjacent to it. This map shows you the study area. It includes the park. So the white piece in the middle is Central Park, or a portion of it, as well as 26 properties that immediately, their property lines are adjacent to the park. Just a little bit of history. This part of the city developed as development moved south along Bank Street in the late 19th century as market gardeners began to subdivide their lands. The arrival of the electric streetcar on Bank Street in 1891 that went to Lansdowne Park really had a significant impact on the pace of urbanization around here. The lands on the glebe were mostly owned by large estates around the turn of the century. There were 3 main historic associations for the study area, and I'll just give you a brief overview of each one. The first is the Ottawa Improvement Commission. This part of the glebe has a strong historical tie to the Ottawa Improvement Commission, which was the predecessor to the National Capital Commission, established near the turn of the century. Central Park itself was identified for creation in a 1903 report by Frederick Todd, which I'll talk a little bit more about later, and was completed in 1912 after Patterson Creek was drained. East of Bank Street and a small portion of this study area was owned by the estates of William Powell and Adelaide Clemo, who formed Clemora Realty to develop a significant number of houses around this area. And west of Bank Street, one of the interesting things here, and this is within the study area, is that the grade is very different. The relationship of the houses to the park is not nearly as strong as it is east of Bank Street. The second significant association for this area were the Hickey family. Much of the study area was actually owned as part of the family's estate. They were early Catholic settlers in the glebe, immigrating from Ireland in the mid-19th century. The streets in the study area that were part of the estate are Rosebery, Chamberlain, Lyon, and Bank. And then the third association, as I just mentioned, is Clemora Park. So the land along Powell Avenue is associated with William Powell and his cousin Adelaide Clemo, who developed Clemora Park in the early 20th century. The Clemo Estate East Heritage Conservation District is strongly associated with Clemora Park. It was part of their original development. In this advertisement you see on the slide, you can see a picture of Central Park. So east of Bank Street in their development, it was really designed with the park in mind. It came after the park, whereas on the west side of Bank Street, in the study area that we're currently talking about, the houses, many of them predate the park. Some of them come later, but they're not really as strongly tied with the park as a sort of organizing feature. So that kind of leads me to our preliminary study findings, is that the area doesn't represent a cohesive cultural heritage landscape. It was built incrementally, was not planned in the same way as we see in the Heritage Conservation District on the east side of Bank Street. Because of its incremental development, it doesn't feature buildings in any sort of cohesive style. And the park, as I just mentioned, is not an organizing feature of the study area. So, the recommendations of this report are that we do not proceed with the designation of a Heritage Conservation District for this area. However, through the course of this project, we identified 2 cultural heritage resources that merit designation under Part 4 of the Heritage Act. The first is Ambassador Court at 612 Bank Street, and Central Park itself, which is 630 Bank Street and 19 Clemo Avenue. Central Park east of Bank Street is already designated as part of a district, but we are recommending the designation of the entirety of the park as an individual designation as well. And then finally, to direct staff to conduct a preliminary HCD study of the remainder of the Clemora Park subdivision, and I'll show you a map of that at the end of my presentation. So I'm just going to go through the 2 buildings that we've identified for the 2 properties we have identified for designation through this project, and the reasons why. The first is the Ambassador Court Apartments, which you may be familiar with. It's located at the northwest corner of Central Park and Bank Street. It's the only building on the west side of Bank Street that actually has an interface with the park. Because of significant grade change, you see a much different situation on this side of Bank Street. And you'll see in the photos that follow that basically you can walk right out the door of the Ambassador Court and into the park. There's very little boundary between public and private space. So in order to designate something under the Ontario Heritage Act under Part 4 of the Act, has to meet the criteria of Ontario Regulation 0906. This slide just illustrates how this building meets that criteria. It has design value as a good example of a purpose-built apartment building that was common in the interwar period. It features elements of the Art Deco style. It has associative value as it was designed by W.E. Nofke, who also designed 12 buildings on the east side of Bank Street. And as far as we know, This collection of buildings in the Clamora Park area represents the largest collection of his work. It's associated with a broader trend of apartment building construction for the middle class in the interwar period, and is associated with local developer David Epstein. And in fact, his name is actually right on the building, and he lived in the building from the time it was constructed until the time of his death. It has contextual value as a landmark for its location adjacent to the park and as a historic building on Bank Street. This is just a historic photo that you can see just the edge of the Ambassador Court building as it interfaces with Central Park. So this is 1929. The building was finished in 1928. The park was finished in 1912. So the building was clearly built with a sort of to take advantage of its location on the park. So Central Park is the second feature that we are recommending for designation under Part 4 of the Act. These maps or aerial photos, show you the way in which the park has changed from 1928 to more recent. As you can see, the top photo is 1928. It shows the park about 15 years after it was finished. It's associated with the early work of the Ottawa Improvement Commission and reflects the City Beautiful movement that was common at that time. It has been altered over time in terms of its pathways, flower beds, that sort of thing, but the original circulation paths and the use of it as a space for passive recreation has remained. So again, as I mentioned, Ontario Regulation 0906 is what we use to evaluate properties for designation under Part 4 of the Heritage Act. Central Park has design value as a large park designed for passive recreation. It's associated with the Ottawa Improvement Commission and their work in the early 20th century to beautify the capital. It's also associated with landscape architect Frederick Todd. He recommended the location of the park. It was not built to his specifications. He was looking for a more natural, sort of bucolic waterside setting. Instead, it was designed in a much more formal way with flower beds, etc. But the location was identified by him. And it has contextual value as a landmark for its size and its location on both sides of Bank Street. And it really defines the context of this part of the glebe. In terms of consultation, Councillor Menard has been circulated and concurs with the findings of the study. Heritage Ottawa was notified of the report, and I saw that they submitted comments to you. The Glebe Community Association has been consulted, and they concur with the findings of the study as well. Carlton Condominium Corporation 822, who is the owners of the Ambassador Court, have been consulted and have not expressed any concerns with the proposed designation. And Central Park is city-owned, and the area east of Bank Street is already designated. So by designating another city-owned resource, we are fulfilling official plan policies about being leaders and designating our own properties. So the fourth recommendation was to recommend that we consider 2 additional areas for study that will sort of round out the study of the Clamora Park subdivision in the glebe. So on this map, you can see in yellow the Clemo Estate East HCD, and the sort of blue hatched area are the 2 additional areas that we have identified through consultation with the Glebe Community Association to be studied for potential designation. These are recommended to be considered in the 2020 departmental work plan for the remainder of this term of council. And that is all I have.
Thank you. Are there any questions for staff on this item? Member Halsall.
Yeah, thank you so much for the background on that. I'm just curious about the hatched area that's going to be studied or proposed for future study. I noticed Clemau Avenue itself actually isn't considered. Was there a reason for that?
I should have hatched that on the map as well. It is actually, that's phase 2. That's the current phase that's undergoing, and or underway, sorry, and that report will come before the committee later this year.
Thank you very much.
I just had a question around the third recommendation, approve the issuance of a notice of intention to designate Central Park in the the Ambassador Court. What's next in the process for that? Just procedurally, what happens if we approve the recommendations today?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If Built Heritage Subcommittee approves these recommendations today, they will go to Council for approval. If Council approves the recommendations, the city will issue the notice of intention to designate to the property owners, and it will also be published in the newspaper. And then that triggers a 30-day appeal period, during which time anybody can appeal the proposed designation. Right now, as Bill 108 is not in effect yet, any appeals to that would go to the Conservation Review Board for a hearing and a recommendation back to Council. If there are no objections, then Council can pass a bylaw.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions from our committee members? Member Podolsky.
Just one friendly question. We all respect Todd, the landscape architect and planner, for choosing the location for Central Park and having an initial design. What I think the committee should probably learn, just in terms of overall city growth and planning, is why the park was chosen in that location in terms of landform and its orientation, which is counter to the grid. I think just as a educational thing, sharing the thinking as to why the park was in that location, and not relating to the grid, would be very informative.
So as I briefly mentioned, the park is located on land that was drained from Patterson's Creek. So Patterson Creek did extend beyond its current sort of inlet at just past O'Connor Street. And also, as I mentioned, Frederick Todd had recommended it more as a bucolic sort of waterside setting and not as a formal series of pathways. And in fact, about a year or two after the park was finished, the then chair of the Ottawa Improvement Commission, Colburn Meredith, spoke about how the park was designed exactly how it should not have been designed. So it's kind of interesting in that it follows the geographic formation of the creek.
I also wanted to convey, Councillor Menard sent me a note earlier today to reiterate that he's very supportive of the recommendations in the report. So are the report recommendations carried? Carried, thank you. So this item rises to Council on September 25th as well. We have no in-camera items today. Are there any notices of motion for consideration at a subsequent meeting? Okay. Are there any inquiries from members? All right. In other business, we did have one planning circulation for 58 Florence Street. It was distributed to members in August, and members of the public do have the opportunity to comment on that through DevApps on ottawa.ca, and we anticipate that a heritage application for that property will come to this committee at a later meeting. Are there any other items of business today? I'm seeing none. So on adjournment, is the motion carried? Carried. Thank you. We are adjourned. Thank you, everyone. And our next meeting of Built Heritage is Tuesday, October 8th. Have a great afternoon.